All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking here on WION at this hour. The Russia-Ukraine conflict is on the verge of completing 16 months, but in the backdrop of incessant explosions and airstrikes, there are efforts to try and establish peace that have also been ongoing. And the latest delegation to in fact try and bring the message of peace was led by the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who's leading the African delegation to try and make the two warring nations see some sense. The delegation reached St. Petersburg in Russia to discuss the probable peace negotiations with President Vladimir Putin. Now, currently, the African initiative to broker peace and officially visit the warring nation comes at a time when Western nations are also unwaveringly engaged in pumping Ukraine with more ammunition to keep the conflict going. But remember, this visit, though, has also been marred by certain controversies right at the moment where it began. On Friday, the 7-country delegation reached Kiev to discuss peace talks with President Zelensky, but the Ukrainian general rejected the probability or chances of peace and reiterated his conditions to initiate peace talks remain the same as before. He went on to state, and I quote, "Russia has to withdraw from the country, and without that, there cannot be any possibility of peace." Now, before the mission reached Ukraine, a plane carrying the president's security personnel and journalists was halted in Poland for over 31 hours. While Warsaw called it an issue of clearance, the South African side has alleged a clear racist angle to the incident, and they say there's nothing else that explains the delay and the behavior. And now there are more reports that have caused concern. President Ramaphosa's spokesperson has received flack for suggesting that Russia's missile attack during the African envoy's visit did not actually happen. But the statement is in serious contention to the South African leader's acknowledgement of missile strikes during his joint press address with Volodymyr Zelensky.
This war must be settled, and there should be peace through negotiations and diplomatic means.
Remercier le président Zelensky.
There must be a de-escalation of the conflict. Today, as we were here, we heard of missile strikes, and those types of activities are not good for fostering peace.
The African Mission for Peace, of course, walks on a bit of a tight rope in aiding the peaceful negotiations as the war continues to rage on. So far, several nations have tried to offer to mediate, including the likes of China, France, India, Brazil, and even Indonesia. But so far, the peace efforts have in fact not led to anything concrete on the ground. And now to give us more insights in terms of whether it is possible at all for Russia and Ukraine to in fact sit across the table against each other and to discuss a negotiated settlement, we're being joined by retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, who is a senior fellow and also a military expert for defense priorities. He's joining us live on this broadcast. So thank you very much indeed for joining us here in WION. And Colonel Davis, let me begin by asking you this. We are witnessing something pretty important. There are 7 African nations who have sent their missions to try and see if the two sides, Russia and Ukraine, can in fact sit across the table and sort out their differences. Do you think that is possible?
Well, certainly at the moment, it's definitely not. Without any question, it's not. You just quoted that Ukrainian general who categorically said that that's not the case, that there's, until Russia leaves all of the territory, they won't even begin negotiations. President Zelensky said the same thing, actually has been saying the same thing for months and never changed it. And so right now, there's just really no openness on the Ukraine side to even contemplate it, because they know that to do that means that they will have to cede some territory to the Russian side to get to peace. And thus far, they're not willing to do that. The problem is that when you look at just the cold, hard calculus on the military side, there's not a lot of prospect that Ukraine, no matter how much the West supports them, is going to be able to militarily regain that territory. The longer this goes and the stronger the Russian side is getting, and it is, then the risk is that they will lose the Ukraine side even more in future negotiations. And that's something they're going to have to consider.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, there have been efforts that have been made in the recent past. Right at the outset of the conflict, Emmanuel Macron, of course, tried very energetically to see if there could be the possibility of negotiations that could be done although that yielded very little. And then more recently, the Chinese side has also been trying to, send feelers to see whether Russia and Ukraine can in fact have some kind of negotiations. Do you think the Chinese will be able to prevail upon the Russians in trying to somehow bring down the hostilities?
There's no chance that nobody from the outside is going to be able to make either side change. The Ukraine side, because they want to get back their territories. The Russian side is not willing to talk because they think that the conventional military balance is in their favor. And the longer things go, the more likely they are to hold on to what they have, if not gain more. And so unless somebody shows them a way that they can continue to hold on to what they have and have a negotiated settlement, they have no motivation or interest in even talking about negotiated settlements. And that's the real problem. Both Russians and the Ukraine side are firm in their decision that they want to win on the battlefield what they can't get negotiations right now, and no one's willing to give anything.
All right, very interesting. Now, I also want to draw your attention to what General Mark Milley in fact said recently. He said that this Ukrainian counteroffensive is going to be a very difficult fight and it will also last for a considerable period of time. Now, how much appetite do you think the Western nations in fact have got to keep on supporting Ukraine in this battle? Because the counteroffensive, I presume, would be the crucial deciding factor, because if Ukraine cannot push back Russia with all the ammunition that the Ukrainians have got from the NATO military alliance, then it's very difficult to see as to what can Ukraine do once they've exhausted with their counteroffensive.
Well, that's exactly right. And we're already starting to see the general outlines of that play out right now, because starting on the 5th of June, the Ukraine side launched off on a massive attack across the broad front. And they have been just completely pushed back in every area. They're making just incremental progress in a couple of areas, yet they have to date not even penetrated the first belt of the Russian main defense area, where the fighting will get much more difficult. And if they can't do that, then everyone is going to start asking that very question. Then why should we continue to give our tanks, our armored vehicles, our money, and our ammunition when you can't win on the battlefield? And I think that there's going to start to be a pretty good push if Ukraine doesn't do something major by the Vilnius NATO summit in next month. I think you're going to start to see more European nations put more pressure on Ukraine's side to make some kind of deal.
Very interesting. Thank you very much indeed, Colonel Davis, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Always my pleasure.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.